A baseball shattered James Clear's face at 17. In the book he eventually wrote about recovery, patience, and tiny progress has since sold over 20 million copies, one invisible habit at a time. This is Offline Connected, where we decode the books a young, hungry strategist actually reads. Finance, power, persuasion, psychology, the canon. We read them carefully so you can absorb the core in one focus session. What follows is our analysis of Atomic Habits, what we believe the author is really saying, and how it might apply to your life. Find a quiet place, disconnect, and let's decode. James Clear's Atomic Habits is a complete architecture for human behavior change. And today we are covering the whole book, not a single chapter. 3 ideas drive everything in it. The first is that tiny, consistent improvements compound into results that look impossible from where you are standing right now. The second is the 4-step mechanical loop that every habit follows, a loop you can learn to engineer deliberately in any direction. And the third is the idea most people miss, that real behavior change is not about goals or motivation. It is about identity. Who you believe you are shapes every choice you make. And this book teaches you how to rewrite that from the ground up. James Clear was 17 when a baseball bat struck him across the face during practice. The blow shattered his skull, fractured his nose, and drove bone fragments into his eye socket. He was airlifted. Doctors were unsure whether he would fully recover. He did. Over the decade that followed, Clear became obsessed with the invisible mechanics underneath performance. The tiny daily behaviors that separate people who build things from people who only intend to. Atomic Habits, published in 2018, has sold over 20 million copies and spent years on the New York Times bestseller list. What made it land where other habit books had not is that Clear was not the first to discover the habit loop. He was the first to organize every piece of behavioral science into a framework that an ordinary person, mid-career, overwhelmed, average, could actually use on a regular Tuesday morning. The first idea, the foundational claim of the entire book, is this: you do not need to be extraordinary to get extraordinary results. You need a 1% improvement applied consistently and compounded over time. Clear argues that tiny changes are not merely useful. They're the only mechanism by which lasting change actually works. A 1% gain every day produces a 37-fold improvement over a single year. A 1% loss every day leaves you with almost nothing. The math does not lie, but the math also does not feel real on any given morning, which is precisely the problem. The reason most people fail to build better habits is not that they lack discipline. It is that they cannot see any return on their investment while it's happening. The results of daily choices are almost never visible when you make them. They arrive later, sometimes much later, as an outcome that seems to appear from nowhere. Clear calls this the plateau of latent potential. You do the work. Nothing visible happens. Then, after long enough, everything does. In 2003, the British cycling team was in polite embarrassment. They had won one Olympic gold medal in 76 years of competition. Equipment manufacturers refused to sell them bikes because association with British cycling was considered bad for the brand. A man named Dave Brailsford was hired as performance director. He brought one idea: the aggregation of marginal gains. He broke down the entire act of competitive cycling into every component he could identify. The obvious ones like training loads and race nutrition, but also the ones no one had thought to optimize. The weight of the racing helmet, the massage gel that reduced muscle soreness by the smallest fraction, the precise pillow density that led to the best night of sleep. He even painted the inside of the team's transport truck white, so that dust and grit, invisible against the dark interior, would show up and be cleaned before it reached the bikes. Each individual change was worth almost nothing. A better pillow does not win the Tour de France. But compound enough small improvements across a full system, and something different happens. Within 5 years, British cyclists won 60% of the gold medals at the Beijing Olympics. Within 10 years, they had won the Tour de France multiple times. This is the argument at the heart of atomic habits. Progress is not about the single heroic effort. It is about refining a system, piece by piece, until the system itself produces results that no single moment of motivation could have reached alone. Clear is making a structural argument, not an emotional one. But here's where it gets interesting. The math also does not punish small imperfections. Missing one day does not destroy the compound. What destroys the compound is never building the system in the first place. There is a sentence in this book that has been shared millions of times. Not because it sounds good, but because it captures something most people have felt without ever quite being able to say. You do not rise to the level of your goals. You fall to the level of your systems. And this is the part nobody wants to hear. You have probably had this experience. You set a goal, a real one, with a specific deadline attached. And for the first week or two, you execute. Then something disrupts the routine. You miss a day, then two. And then the goal itself starts to feel abstract, like something the version of you from last month invented. Clear's argument is that this is not a motivation failure. It is a system failure. You build a goal and attached a deadline to it, but you never built the surrounding architecture, the cue that would trigger the behavior, the environment that would make it easy, the reliable reward that would close the loop. You were betting on sustained willpower, which is the least stable resource a human being has. If you have spent years setting the same resolution every January, if you have bought the journal and the gym membership and the productivity app and found yourself back at zero by March, you are not broken. You are running a motivation system in a world that runs on environmental design. The goal was never the problem. The system you never built was. So the first idea is this. The gap between where you are and where you want to be is almost never a talent gap or a motivation gap. It is a systems gap. The people who seem to improve effortlessly, the ones you look at and assume are either naturally gifted or obsessively disciplined, are mostly running better systems in the background. Not harder, better. Clear is asking you to stop measuring success by how intensely you want something and start measuring it by how well the daily environment around you is designed to produce that thing without requiring constant willpower. The goal is the direction. The system is the vehicle. You cannot reach a destination with direction alone. The second idea is where the book becomes mechanical. Clear argues that every habit, without exception, follows a four-step loop: cue, craving, response, reward. The cue is the trigger that tells your brain a habit is available. The craving is the motivational force, the desire for the reward, not the habit itself. The response is the actual behavior, and the reward is the payoff that teaches the brain to run this loop again. This is not new science. B.F. Skinner mapped reinforcement cycles in the 1930s. Charles Duhigg popularized the habit loop in The Power of Habit in 2012. What Clear adds is a practical translation. He converts the loop into 4 actionable laws. Make it obvious. Make it attractive. Make it easy. Make it satisfying. 1 law for each step in the cycle. And each law has an inverse, a way to break a bad habit by reversing the same mechanism that built it. This is why the book works for people who have read about habits before and still could not change. The 4 laws give you a lever at every point in the loop. You do not have to rely on wanting to do the habit. You design the conditions so that the habit becomes the default, the path of least resistance, the thing that happens if you do not actively choose otherwise. Consider what Clear calls implementation intention. Researchers have studied what happens when people commit not just to wanting to exercise, but to a specific plan, exactly when and where they will do it. In one study, people who wrote down a concrete schedule, I will exercise on Monday, Wednesday, and Friday at 6 in the morning in my living room, were 2 to 3 times more likely to follow through than people who only reported being motivated to exercise. The cue is made obvious, not when I feel like it, not sometime in the morning, a specific time and a specific place. Clear goes further with a technique he calls habit stacking, linking a new behavior to an existing one with a precise formula. After I pour my morning coffee, I will sit down and write for 10 minutes. The existing habit becomes the cue for the new one. You're not relying on memory or motivation. You're building a chain. And then there is environment design, which Clear argues is more powerful than motivation in almost every measurable case. A person who keeps a bowl of fruit on the kitchen counter eats more fruit, not because they decided to be healthier, because the cue became visible and the response became easy. A person who leaves their guitar in the middle of the living room practices more than the one who keeps it in a case at the back of a closet. The habit did not change. The environment did. And so what does that actually mean for you? It means the first place to look when a habit fails is not your willpower. It is your kitchen counter. It is whether the cue for the behavior you want is visible and close, or buried somewhere that requires effort to reach. Clear writes something about the relationship between environment and behavior that reads as obvious until you sit with it, at which point it reframes almost every failure you can name. Environment is the invisible hand that shapes human behavior. Think about the last habit you tried to build. Exercise, reading, earlier mornings, whatever it was. Now ask yourself, did you design a cue for it? Did you attach it to something that already happened in your day, so the behavior had a trigger rather than requiring you to remember? Did you make it easy enough that on your worst day, when you're tired and running low on everything, you could still do it? Or did you just decide you were going to do it and then rely on that single decision to carry you through every difficult day that followed? Most people build habits as decisions. Clear is asking you to build them as systems. The decision is what gets you started, but the system is what runs after the motivation fades, which it always does, usually somewhere around Thursday of week 1. If your gym bag is not already packed the night before, if the book is not already on the nightstand with the bookmark in it, if the cue is not visible and waiting, you are building a habit that requires a fresh decision every single time. And eventually, on the wrong morning, the decision will go the wrong way. Design the environment so the decision is already made. The second idea, then, is that habits are not about discipline. They are about engineering. Every behavior is a response to its environment. If you want a different response, you do not need more motivation. You need a better cue, a simpler path to the behavior, a faster and more reliable reward. Clear is not telling you to try harder. He is telling you that trying harder is often the wrong intervention. The behavior you want is already possible for you. The question is whether the architecture surrounding your daily life is designed to produce it or to prevent it. And now, the third idea, the one that reframes everything that came before. Clear argues that there are 3 layers at which human change can occur. The outermost layer is outcomes, the results you want, losing weight, writing a book, building financial independence. The middle layer is process, the systems and habits that produce those results. The innermost layer, the deepest level, is identity, what you believe about yourself. Most people try to change from the outside in. They set an outcome, build a process toward it, and hope their sense of self eventually adjusts. Clear argues this is backward. The most durable behavior change comes from the inside out. You decide who you want to be. Then you find habits that confirm that identity. And every time you execute the habit, you cast a vote for the person you are becoming. The goal is not to run a marathon. The goal is to become a runner. The goal is not to write a novel. The goal is to become someone who writes. Identity first, outcome second. The sequence matters more than any single technique the book offers. Clear describes two people who are offered a cigarette at a party. The first says, "No thanks, I am trying to quit." The second says, "No thanks, I do not smoke." The behavioral difference between those two statements is significant. The first person is fighting a craving they still identify with. They are exerting willpower against their own self-concept. The second person has already reframed who they are. Not smoking is not an act of discipline for them. It is an expression of identity. And identity-based habits are far harder to break than outcome-based ones, because breaking them means contradicting who you are. Clear traces this to the psychology of self-consistency, the deep human tendency to behave in ways that match our beliefs about ourselves. We are not always rational actors choosing the most efficient path. We are identity actors choosing the path most consistent with our self-image, even when that path is objectively counterproductive. This is why shame-based behavior change rarely works. Telling someone they are lazy does not make them less lazy. It deepens the identity, which deepens the behavior. The leverage point is the identity, not the behavior. Change what a person believes about themselves, even through small, accumulated evidence, and the behaviors follow without requiring sustained willpower. And this is the part nobody wants to hear. Each small habit is a vote for the person you're becoming. You do not become a reader after one page. You do not become disciplined after one early morning. But over time, you accumulate enough votes that the identity becomes incontestable, even to yourself. You look back at 6 months of evidence and cannot deny what kind of person that pattern suggests you are. The votes add up. The identity solidifies. The behavior stops requiring effort and starts requiring less thought than not doing it. He puts the identity argument into one sentence that carries the weight of the entire book. Every action you take is a vote for the type of person you wish to become. So what does this mean for you? Not in the abstract, but in the actual texture of a regular Tuesday. When the alarm goes off and the bed is warm and the habit feels optional. When the willpower is low and the justifications for skipping are already close to hand. Clear's answer is that the Tuesday version of you does not need motivation. That version just needs to cast one vote. Not a perfect performance, not an exceptional effort. One small action that says, "This is consistent with who I am." If you have been telling yourself for years that you're not disciplined, not a morning person, not someone who follows through, you are not describing reality. You are protecting an identity. And you built that identity the same way Clear says you build a better one, through accumulated evidence. The difference is that you have been accumulating evidence for the wrong conclusion. That evidence can be replaced, not overnight and not all at once, but one vote at a time, starting from the next small action you take that contradicts the old story. The third idea closes the loop on everything that came before. Small habits compound into results you cannot yet see. The 4 laws of behavior change give you the mechanical means to design those habits without relying on willpower. An identity, the story you carry about who you are, is the foundation that makes the other 2 stable under pressure. Without the identity layer, systems eventually break down. Not because the environment design failed, because when things get hard, and they always get hard, the person stopped believing they were the kind of person who does this. The behavior lost its anchor. With identity in place, missing a day does not feel like failure. It feels like an anomaly, something inconsistent with who you already are. And anomalies have a natural tendency to correct themselves. In the late 1990s, a young man named Eliud Kipchoge was running through the highlands of Kenya. Not yet famous, not yet the greatest marathon runner in recorded human history. He was simply running, every day, in modest shoes, through the same routes, logging the same hours, eating the same simple foods, sleeping at the same hour. No one watching would have predicted what was building. The accumulation was invisible. The compound was operating below any threshold of notice. But the system was being constructed, loop by loop, kilometer by kilometer, and the identity was hardening into something that would eventually become unbreakable. I run. I do not skip. I rest precisely, and I attack precisely. That is who I am. Kipchoge eventually ran a marathon in under 2 hours, something physiologists had long considered beyond the limits of human biology, something no runner in the documented history of the sport had ever done. He did it not by trying harder than everyone else on race day. He did it by being more systematic than everyone else across a longer period of time, in ways that were invisible from the outside, and so consistent they barely registered as effort from the inside. He is asked constantly what his secret is, and he says, almost without variation, some version of the same thing. He does not set extraordinary goals. He runs every day. He sleeps early. He eats simply. He does not complicate it. Clear never mentions Kipchoge in Atomic Habits, but he might as well have. Every idea in the book, the compounding of tiny improvements, the environmental design that makes the behavior the default, the identity-based practice that makes deviation feel like a contradiction, maps directly onto what the fastest marathon runner in history actually does. Not what he says in interviews. What he does day after day in ways too unremarkable to photograph and too consistent to doubt. The results looked miraculous from the outside. The system was not miraculous at all. Of the 3 ideas in this book, only one can be your entry point this week. Not because the others are optional, they are not, but because trying to implement all 3 simultaneously is itself a systems failure. Too many levers at once. The new behavior breaks before it has time to form. Start with identity, not with a habit, not with a system, with a question: who specifically is the person you are trying to become? Give that person a shape. Not someone healthier, someone who walks 20 minutes before breakfast. Not someone more focused, someone who reads 10 pages every night before sleep. Specific enough that you could recognize the identity in a mirror in the pattern of an ordinary week. Then find the smallest possible habit that a person with that identity would obviously do. Not the ideal version of the habit, the minimum viable version. So small that on your worst day, when you're tired and the schedule is broken down, you could still do it in 5 minutes or less. Do that one thing this week. Every day, if possible. If you miss one day, do it the next. Never miss twice. Not because missing twice destroys the compound. It does not, but because missing twice is how a behavior stops being identity and starts being something you used to try to do. One habit, one identity, enough evidence, accumulated slowly, to begin rewriting the story you have been telling yourself about who you are. That is the book. That is the only intervention worth starting before next week. We started with a baseball shattering a 17-year-old's face. And when James Clear finally healed, when the bone fragments were removed, the vision came back, and the possibility of playing baseball again became real. He did not return through willpower or inspiration or one transformative decision. He came back through small, unremarkable daily repetition. One practice, then another, until the person he needed to become was already present in the evidence of what he had actually done. That is Atomic Habits, not a motivational story, a structural argument about how human beings actually change. The next decode on this channel is Deep Work by Cal Newport. a book about training your mind to focus in a world designed to destroy that focus. If Atomic Habits shows you how to build the daily behaviors, Deep Work shows you what to do inside those hours once you have them. One question for the comments. Which of the three ideas landed hardest for you? The compound logic of small gains, the 4-law framework, or the identity shift? Tell us below.